Hey there. Ready for another deep dive with us?
Always?
You guys sent in some pretty wild stuff about this Hargan family killings,
Yeah.
specifically some excerpts from the Wondery podcast, Blood is Thicker.
Okay.
Episode 3, A Killer in Plain Sight.
Ah.
And, well, the title's pretty accurate. We're going to be focusing on Megan Hargan,
Okay.
the surviving daughter and sister who becomes a prime suspect.
Right.
2 women found dead in their home. Initially, it seemed like a murder-suicide.
Oh, wow.
But as we're about to find out, things aren't always as they appear.
It's like that saying, right?
Yeah.
Truth is stranger than fiction.
Definitely applies here.
Yeah.
So what's so captivating about this case?
Well, for me, it's how this case really shows you how important those little details are.
Yeah,
Because sometimes those are the keys to the truth, especially in a tricky investigation like this one.
for sure.
Right.
Let's set the scene. Pamela Hargan, successful businesswoman, and her daughter Helen are found dead in their Virginia home. Pamela's other daughter, Megan, is the one who calls 911.
Okay.
And at first, the police suspect a murder-suicide.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
With Helen as the one who did it.
But then, Detective Byerson, the lead investigator, starts noticing some strange things.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, it's like someone tried to make the scene look a certain way.
Okay.
For example, the rifle was found near Helen's body, but there was almost no blood on it.
Oh, wow.
And get this, both Pamela and Helen's cell phones were totally wiped clean.
That's interesting.
It's those little things that start to make investigators suspicious.
You would think that if someone was going to end their own life,
Right.
wiping their phones wouldn't be that important.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those details that makes you go,
Yeah,
wait a minute, something's not right.
right.
Plus, the autopsy report basically debunks that whole murder-suicide theory.
Oh, how so?
Well, the way the bullet went into Helen's head,
Yeah.
it would have been pretty much impossible for her to have shot herself.
Ah, I see. Yeah, that angle would be really difficult.
Plus, they found gunshot residue on Megan's hands.
Oh, so now the investigation is shifting towards her.
Exactly. It's like the puzzle pieces are starting to fit together, but not in the way they expected.
Yeah.
To figure out if Megan was involved, we need to understand the family dynamics a bit more.
Okay.
I read in your notes that Megan was seen as the responsible one, while Helen was more dependent on the family.
That's right.
That difference in their personalities seems important here.
It does. From the podcast, we learned that Megan was actually planning to move to West Virginia with her husband and daughter,
Okay.
and Pamela was helping her financially with the move.
Oh, interesting. So finances are already starting to play a role.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
And we all know money can complicate things, especially in families.
Absolutely. It's often a source of tension and conflict.
Exactly. And in this case, the financial side becomes a crucial piece of the puzzle.
We also hear from Megan's close friend, Rebecca.
Yeah?
She describes Megan as kind and caring. Rebecca seems genuinely shocked by everything that happened.
Wow.
Makes you wonder, could someone like that be involved in something so awful?
I know. It makes you think, can we ever really know the people closest to us? People can keep secrets, have hidden reasons for doing things, and even those closest to them might not know.
So true. Back to Megan's move to West Virginia. This is where things get interesting. There's some mystery around the house she was buying and how she was paying for it.
Right, you're picking up on something important here.
Yeah.
Megan's story about where the money for the house was coming from kept changing.
Oh, really?
First, she told investigators it was a wire transfer from her mother.
Okay.
Then she said it was a cashier's check. Finally, she claimed the money came from a family trust that was being dissolved.
Wait, a family trust? Could you explain that?
Of course. It's basically a legal way to manage money and assets for family members. But when Megan said the money came from a trust that was being closed down, that raised red flags for the investigators.
Yeah, I can see why. If the trust wasn't active anymore, how could she get the money to buy a house?
Exactly. It just didn't add up.
So we've got a changing story about the money and a mysterious family trust. The financial aspect of this case is looking more and more suspicious.
Absolutely. And here's the biggest surprise. The $400,000 she needed for the house never actually left Pamela's account.
Really?
The police found this out through recordings from Capital One Bank, and it becomes a turning point in the case.
So Megan's story about the money was totally made up. That's huge.
It definitely makes her look less trustworthy. Remember, we're not talking about a small amount of money here. It's a lot of money that just seemed to disappear. And the fact that Megan kept changing her story about it makes her seem even more suspicious.
It's like she was trying to hide something, but the evidence kept contradicting her. This whole money situation, along with those weird details at the crime scene and the gunshot residue on her hands, it's really making us see Megan in a different light. Makes you think, what was she hiding? Could this all be about the money? Did that have something to do with the deaths of her mom and sister?
Those are the exact questions the investigators started asking. And as they dug deeper into Megan's actions and what might have motivated her, things took a dark turn during her interrogation.
So we left off with that huge revelation about the money for the house never actually leaving Pamela's account.
Yeah, crazy, right?
This financial mystery is becoming a big part of the investigation, right?
Definitely.
I bet the police see that as a big problem for Megan's story.
Yeah, this definitely changes how they view her,
Mm.
makes them question everything she said.
Right, because before this, she was saying she was innocent. She even tried to blame her sister, Helen, for their mother's death.
Oh.
But like we talked about, the evidence just doesn't support that.
Right.
And now with all these money problems coming up,
Yeah.
it seems like no one believes Megan anymore.
Yeah, her story's falling apart.
And the police aren't letting up. They bring her in for questioning, hoping she'll tell them what really happened that day.
Okay.
This interrogation is a big moment in the case, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. This is where we really start to see the cracks in Megan's story.
Yeah.
The detectives spent hours questioning her, going over every single detail, every inconsistency.
Must have been intense.
Oh, yeah.
Did they say anything about how she acted during the interview?
They did. They noticed that she would act differently at different times during the interrogation.
Oh, really?
Sometimes she was emotional, almost hysterical. Other
Oh.
times she was calm and collected, trying to seem like she was cooperating and being helpful.
So she was trying to act like a grieving daughter, but also trying to make sure no one suspected her.
Basically, it must have been something to see.
So did the detectives fall for it?
Not really. They noticed that she would get more evasive when they pushed her for details.
Oh,
For example, she first told the police that she and her daughter had already left the house before the shootings happened,
Okay.
but then she changed her story
Really?
and said that she would have heard something if Helen had shot their mother.
Wait, so which was it? Was she there or not?
Exactly. It seems like she's contradicting herself
Yeah.
and getting caught in her own lies.
It sounds like she was changing her story to match the evidence.
Right. Instead of just telling the truth about what happened,
Mm-hmm.
the detectives definitely noticed that too.
Smart.
They started to think that she was just making things up as she went along,
I see.
trying to make the investigation go in a different direction.
Sounds like she's playing a dangerous game.
Definitely.
But you can't fool experienced investigators forever, right?
You got that right. The detectives weren't buying her act anymore.
Good.
They'd seen it all before suspects trying to change the story, hoping to throw them off track. But they were determined to figure this out, and they had a few more tricks up their sleeves.
I remember reading in your notes about the police doing some digging of their own, especially about that wire transfer for the house in West Virginia.
Right.
They even got recordings from Capital One Bank.
They did.
And those recordings turned out to be really important in figuring out what happened with the money.
They were key. They proved that it was Megan, not her mother, who started the wire transfer for the house.
So she was caught in a lie.
Exactly.
It's one thing to lie,
Yeah.
but to have actual proof that you're lying, that's something else.
Right. This makes her involvement seem even more likely.
How did Megan react when they told her about the recordings?
Well, she didn't admit to anything.
Of course not.
She just came up with another story.
Really?
Tried to explain away the recordings by saying that her mother had asked her to do the transfer for her.
Oh, come on. That's a pretty bad excuse.
Yeah, the detectives didn't buy it either.
Good.
They pointed out all the things that didn't make sense in her story.
Right.
Like the fact that the recordings clearly showed Megan as the one who started the transfer.
Right.
They also asked her about the missing $400,000.
Yeah, where did that money go?
Exactly. They wanted to know where it went if it never left Pamela's account.
Did she have an answer?
Not really. Instead of talking about the missing money,
Mm-hmm.
she changed the subject completely.
Oh, really? What did she say?
She started talking about two suspicious men,
Okay.
one black, one Asian,
Mhm.
that she claimed to have seen in the neighborhood before the murders.
So was she implying that these men were involved somehow?
That's what she wanted the detectives to think.
I see.
She even said that her mother asked her to hide the rifle because she was afraid of these men.
So basically she was trying to make the investigation focus on someone else?
Exactly. She was trying to create a distraction.
It seems like she's trying really hard to avoid taking responsibility.
It does seem that way.
But I bet the detectives didn't just believe her, right?
Of course not. They looked into her claims about these men, but they couldn't find any evidence to support her story.
So she made it all up.
Seems like it. No other neighbors reported seeing these men, and there were no records of Megan calling the police about any suspicious activity before the murders.
Oh, another lie. She's really making things worse for herself with all these lies.
It's not looking good for her,
Well,
especially with those bank recordings.
Yeah?
And now this made-up story about the suspicious men, the detectives are starting to believe that Megan is the one who did it.
But they still needed that one big piece of evidence to really prove she was involved.
Right, that smoking gun.
And that's where the episode ends,
Yeah,
leaving us hanging, wondering what's going to happen
a
next.
classic cliffhanger.
What was this big reveal? A confession? A witness? Tell me you know.
You'll have to wait for part 3 of this deep dive to find out. Remember, we're going by what you sent us, and you only gave us parts of this episode. But I can tell you this, the truth is about to come out, and it's going to change everything.
Okay, so we're dying to know, what was this bombshell evidence they found?
Well, you remember those 2 men Megan says she saw in the neighborhood?
Oh, yeah.
She claimed she told her mother about them, and that's why Pamela wanted to hide the rifle.
Right, trying to shift the blame. But the
Yeah.
police couldn't find any evidence to support her story.
Exactly. And here's where that crucial piece of evidence comes in a phone call.
Really?
The detectives found a call Megan made to the police just a few days before the murders.
Wait, she called the police? But I thought you said there were no reports of suspicious activity.
There weren't, because when she called, Megan never actually mentioned any suspicious men.
Oh, what did she say then?
She called to report that her mother was acting crazy
Hmm.
and might be a danger to herself or others.
So she was basically trying to make it seem like her mother was unstable?
Yeah, potentially even violent.
But why? What was she trying to do?
It's like she was setting things up, you know? Like if things went bad, she could say that her mother was the one who started it.
Oh.
Maybe even that her mother killed Helen and Megan had to defend herself.
Wow, that's messed up. So this phone call was the proof the detectives needed.
It definitely helped their case against her.
Mhm.
It shows that she was lying and planning things, which is hard to ignore.
Right.
And remember, this is on top of all the other stuff. The inconsistent stories about the house money, the gunshot residue on her hands, and the fact that the crime scene looked staged.
So many lies.
It's like the detectives were slowly uncovering the truth,
Yeah.
tearing down all her lies.
But did they ever figure out why she did it? What would make someone kill their own family?
Well, the podcast goes into more detail about that in later episodes. They explore possible psychological reasons and family issues that might have led to her actions. But remember, we're only talking about the parts you sent us, which mainly focus on the investigation up to this point.
Right, right. But even with just this information, it's hard not to wonder what could have driven her to do something so terrible.
For sure. Was it just about the money? Or was there something more, some hidden anger or unresolved conflict within the family?
Yeah, those are the kind of questions investigators and psychologists probably think about for a long time.
Exactly. Trying to understand what goes on in someone's mind is really complicated.
Definitely.
What might seem like a clear reason to one person could be totally different for someone else.
Man, this deep dive has been crazy. We started with what seemed like a simple murder-suicide,
Yeah.
but then it turned into this whole twisted story of lies, money problems, and a daughter suspected of killing her own mother and sister.
It's a reminder that things aren't always what they seem,
Definitely.
and that the truth can be hidden under a lot of lies and deception.
It takes skilled investigators, paying attention to the small stuff, and a willingness to follow the evidence to find out what really happened. Absolutely. This case makes us think about a lot of things. How strong forensic evidence is, how different stories can clash, and how complicated family relationships can be in criminal investigations.
It really does.
But most importantly, it reminds us that people are capable of doing terrible things, even to their own family.
And that we should always think critically, question what we hear, and not just believe everything we're told, especially in a case as complex and emotional as this one.
I know I've got a lot to think about after this deep dive. Thanks for joining me. And to you, dear listener, we encourage you to keep digging into this case and others like it. Check out the other episodes of the Blood is Thicker podcast. Think about the evidence, the motivations, and decide for yourself who was responsible for the deaths of Pamela and Helen Hargan.